They used to call it a corpse. For almost 2 decades on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a skeleton of steel and concrete sat under the Sahel sun, rusted tanks, dead pipes, weeds pushing through cracked cement. That was all that remained of BRAFASO, a brewery born in the early 2000s and buried under debt corruption and mismanagement a few years later. The state paid the bill, the creditors walked away, and the people were left with nothing but a monument to failure. And then one morning, the cameras returned. This time, the picture was different. Stainless steel tanks polished until they reflected the sky. Freshly painted walls bearing a new name, SN-BRAFASO Société Nouvelle Brasserie du Faso. Workers in uniforms lining the production hall. And at the center of it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, hand on the start button of a factory that had once been written off as industrial scrap. On paper, it looks simple. A head of state inaugurates a beverage plant. But if you stop at that surface, you miss the real story. Because this is not just about beer. It is about who owns production, who controls markets, and who decides whether a poor African country is condemned to import forever or allowed to produce for itself. For more than 15 years, this site symbolized a model that chained Burkina Faso to dependency, private profit. When things go well, public debt. When everything collapses. Today, the same site is being presented as the opposite, a test case for something new. Sovereign industrialization led by the state, fueled by local raw materials, and designed, at least in theory, to serve Burkina Faso farmers, workers, and consumers first. So the real question is not, why did Traoré open a brewery? The real question is, how did a dead factory become a political weapon? And what does SN-BRAFASO really tell us about the economic revolution Traoré claims to be building? That is where our story begins. Before understanding why SN-BRAFASO matters today, we must retrace the slow, painful collapse of its predecessor, because the past explains exactly why the rebirth of this factory became a political statement. A factory born with promise and buried by the old system. When BRAFASO first opened in the early 2000s, it was celebrated as a symbol of modernization. Foreign investors praised its potential. Local officials saw it as proof that Burkina Faso could attract global capital. But behind the speeches, the same familiar pattern quietly unfolded. Imported machinery bought at inflated prices. Management decisions taken outside the country. Debt accumulation disguised as investment. Local suppliers left out of the value chain. By 2007-2008, the numbers were no longer hiding the truth. Production stalled, revenues fell, debt exploded. And as always, the burden landed on the state, meaning the people. The factory shut down. Hundreds lost their jobs. The equipment rusted. And the site became a metaphor for a continent trapped between dependency and the illusion of development. The return. Why this moment matters. Fast forward nearly 2 decades. When Traoré stepped onto the grounds of the abandoned plant, he was not just reopening a beverage factory. He was confronting a historical failure and rewriting its meaning. The revival of SN-BRAFASO was built on 3 ideological pillars. State leadership over strategic industries. Instead of selling the ruins to foreign corporations, the state took ownership and rebuilt it through public financing and national expertise. Local raw materials. Over-imports, sorghum, corn, and Burkina Faso agricultural products were placed at the center of the supply chain, turning farmers into industrial partners, not just spectators. Economic sovereignty as a political statement. Reopening the factory was not a business event, it was a declaration. Burkina Faso will no longer export raw value and import finished dependency. Why the rebirth resonates across Africa. Because SN-BRAFASO challenges a long-standing pattern. Africa grows what the world consumes, but rarely processes it itself. This moment, therefore, carries symbolic weight. A dead factory resurrected by national will, rejecting the old model of indebted industrialization. In the eyes of supporters, this is not just economics. It is a cultural, psychological, and political shift, an assertion that Africans can build, operate, and control industries that once existed only through foreign partners. And that is why the inauguration of SN-BRAFASO is causing conversations far beyond Burkina Faso. It forces a question many African leaders avoided for decades. What does sovereignty look like in practice, not in speeches? When Captain Ibrahim Traoré cut the ribbon at SN-BRAFASO, he wasn't unveiling an old factory restored with cosmetic repairs. What emerged was an industrial system, redesigned from the ground up, aligned with his vision of sovereignty, self-reliance, and continental pride. This was not nostalgia. It was a blueprint for the future. A modern industrial core built by Burkina Faso for Burkina Faso. Walking through the plant today, one immediately notices a striking fact. The majority of the equipment technicians and engineers are local. Gone are the days when every spare part had to be imported. Every maintenance delegation came from abroad, and every malfunction meant weeks of shutdown. SN-BRAFASO now operates with new automated bottling lines, calibrated for regional and continental demand. Energy-efficient systems designed to reduce dependence on foreign fuel imports. Local engineering teams trained through national technical institutes. A quality control lab ensuring products meet both African and international standards. This is not just reindustrialization. It is industrial dignity. Traoré's government has repeatedly emphasized one principle. Modernization must not mean dependency. SN-BRAFASO is the proof. A factory anchored in agriculture, turning farmers into stakeholders. Unlike the old economic model which relied heavily on imported raw materials, the new factory is built around Burkina Faso's agricultural backbone. This is where the transformation becomes truly strategic. SN-BRAFASO's entire supply chain now prioritizes sorghum from local cooperatives, corn from rural production zones, natural flavorings sourced within Burkina Faso. This means thousands of farmers previously marginalized are now direct participants in industrial production. For the first time, entire rural communities can rise with the industry they feed. This design solves multiple structural issues at once. Cuts import bills, boosts rural income, creates a stable, sovereign supply chain, reduces vulnerability to global market volatility. This is not simply a factory. It is an integrated national ecosystem. New products, new vision, competing on the African market. The factory's product strategy goes beyond satisfying local consumption. SN-BRAFASO has set its sights on ECOWAS regional distribution, Pan-African beverage markets, diaspora-focused export lines. This ambition is backed by new branding that emphasizes African identity, Burkina Faso craftsmanship, clean natural ingredients. In other words, African production, African ownership, African global pride. Why this matters politically. At first glance, reopening a beverage factory might seem like a simple economic revival. But in the Sahel, where sovereignty, economic control, and foreign interference define national trajectories, SN-BRAFASO is a political message carved in steel and concrete. Its design tells the world, we will produce what we consume. We will control what we create. We will rise on our terms. And this is why Western observers are paying attention. A sovereign factory is not a threat, but a self-sufficient Africa is. The economic shockwave created by SN-BRAFASO is far larger than the physical size of the factory itself. When its machines restarted, they triggered a chain reaction across multiple layers of Burkina Faso's economy. Industrial jobs in the Sahel generate far more than salaries. Each one activates supply chains, transport networks, agricultural demand, and thousands of indirect livelihoods. With SN-BRAFASO scaling production, economists estimate thousands of jobs will emerge both inside the facility and across rural farming zones supplying it. But the deepest transformation happens in the countryside. By sourcing sorghum maize and local raw materials, the factory stabilizes incomes for farmers who previously depended on volatile commodity markets. Instead of selling raw crops at low prices, they now have a predictable long-term buyer. This single change strengthens rural families, supports schooling, reduces migration pressure, and redirects young men from risky informal work toward stable economic roles. Transport and logistics also evolve naturally around the factory. Better feeder roads, collection centers, and small trucking businesses appear to meet production demand. In economic terms, SN-BRAFASO doesn't just revive an industrial site, it anchors a new regional development corridor. On a macro level, the factory reduces foreign imports and strengthens the currency by keeping value inside Burkina Faso. Every bottle produced locally is a bottle not bought abroad, meaning less pressure on foreign reserves. It expands the tax base, boosts local spending, and proves that a sovereign economy can grow without external loans dictating policy. Its psychological impact may be the most important. For the first time in decades, many Burkinabe see industrialization as something possible, not theoretical. A factory becomes a symbol of national capability, a sign that the country can build produce and export on its own terms. SN-BRAFASO's reopening is not only transforming the economy, it is reshaping the social fabric of Burkina Faso. National pride rises when citizens see modern machinery operated by local engineers producing goods with local materials. The psychological barrier that once suggested industrial progress must come from outside begins to crumble. Young people are the first to feel this shift. Instead of viewing migration as the only path to success, they now see opportunity within their own borders. The presence of a functioning modern factory shows them that they can build a future at home, a profound reversal of decades of brain drain. Women also benefit in ways that are often overlooked. Through farming cooperatives and supply contracts, they gain direct access to stable markets and improved bargaining power. As their income grows, so does their influence in both households and communities. Industrialization done locally becomes a tool of empowerment. Entire villages supplying the factory become more organized and prosperous. With steady demand for their crops, they invest in storage irrigation and cooperative management. Schools gain more students as parents achieve stability. Even social cohesion strengthens as youths find structured employment, rather than drifting into informal or dangerous, unstable sectors. Culturally, SN-BRAFASO becomes a symbol. Artists, musicians, and storytellers begin celebrating local production, reinforcing a sense of identity rooted in self-reliance. The factory becomes more than machinery. It becomes a narrative of who Burkinabe people aspire to become. SN-BRAFASO marks a turning point in Burkina Faso's long-term strategy. It is the embodiment of a doctrine that Ibrahim Traoré has repeated since taking office. Sovereignty is not a slogan. It is built through production value creation and control over national industries. The factory's revival, without IMF loans or Western consultants, sends a clear geopolitical message: Burkina Faso can industrialize on its own terms. This reduces foreign leverage and signals to the world that the Sahel is no longer willing to operate within a dependency-based model. As the AES alliance consolidates industrial projects across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, SN-BRAFASO becomes a prototype of what an independent Sahel economy looks like. The impact is ideological as much as economic. A generation of young Africans is watching and learning that development does not have to follow Western templates. It can be built around African needs and African priorities. This mental shift, once fully internalized, becomes irreversible. In the broader African context, the factory represents a small but decisive step toward a continent that produces rather than only consumes, negotiates, rather than obeys and defines its own future, rather than accepting one imposed from outside. SN-BRAFASO may not be the largest industrial site in Africa, but its symbolism is monumental. It demonstrates that sovereignty can be manufactured, not requested, and it marks the beginning of a new chapter in the Sahel's pursuit of dignity, autonomy, and industrial power.